G'day and welcome to the Ball Boys AFL Fantasy Podcast. Today we have a very special episode. We are talking to a great man who's won the competition 2 times before. He's also come top, 25 again. He's gone over to the other competition. He's done pretty well there. We're talking to the GOAT, Selby, about AFL Fantasy. Let's go!
Just done it from nowhere. Blasted the goal from inside the 30. Seed from the boundary. Dusty. Petrarca. The legend becomes immortal.
G'day and welcome again to the Ball Boys AFL Fantasy Podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Casey, and you can find me on Twitter at Ball Boys Fantasy. Joined as always by coach of the Mighty Oxlogs, Luke Rogerson, mate. And I'll tell you what, I'm a bit starstruck today. There's a big guest waiting in the wings here. And
mate, I thought you were hiding it well. I've said for every one of these that I'm excited, but I think that's an understatement compared to this one. We are talking to the GOAT. Should we get him on screen?
Let's get the great man in here.
Absolutely, there he is. Welcome, Selby.
Welcome to the Ball Boys. How are you, mate?
G'day, boys. Thanks for the pump up. Nice to be on.
Yeah, absolutely. Good to have you on. And we've been talking to a lot of great members of the fantasy community. And it is a really great fantasy community. And you yourself are one with quite the resume. So it's good to have you on to chat here. The first thing I want to do is just, again, continue the pump up of your tires here. But just in case that anyone who listening is not aware of, I guess, your story, and I'm sure they have heard of your name along the way, but I guess your philosophies with AFL Fantasy that led to you winning back-to-back cars in the competition. Just talk about through what that was and how that's then evolved into Moreira's magic as we know it today.
Yep. So 2017 is when came into the limelight, winning the comp by, I think it was a record margin, 500 and something points. And I went slightly different, which isn't different new age. Everyone listening to this knows what to do, but picked pretty well a full team of value players, not all mid-prices, but people who I thought could outperform their price and obviously deemed successful. So then the year after that, I essentially just had that same team I had the year before and plugged and played similar ilk players, similar price points, similar metrics on why I think they could outperform. And yeah, backed it up and went again, coming a draw and tying for the first place in 2018. So obviously that structure and methodology works, or worked at least, which fast forward to 2024 and all pre-season, as you know, content's about finding that value. So we all know full well how to succeed in this game. But that's really where I stumbled across what I think is the true tried and true method.
How does that feel, just to know that you're like? I mean, I refer to you. I talk about you as like the Steph Curry of AFL Fantasy. You changed the game. You popularized the value elements. Steph popularized the 3-point game. Do you kind of sit back and sort of go like, wow, it's pretty crazy that my methods have sort of influenced, I guess, the next, generation or whatever you call it of fantasy strategy?
Oh, it's funny because people were picking these mid-prices prior to 2017. It's just that it all seemed to work out well. So those people probably thinking, shit, I was there before, so it could have been me. That's gone so far. I'm now trying to find the balance between hunting that value, but also getting those points on field too. And I'm finding that sweet spot, particularly this year, very hard to nail.
Something that I think intrigues me, mate, is you mentioned obviously that it very much since you won back-to-back, it's become that copycat league. Everyone's sort of implementing the strategy that you use. Are there any times where you look and you think that there's some mistakes that people make in trying to implement your strategy? So they're implementing it, but it's just they're not quite getting it right. Are there a few mistakes that you see that are pretty common?
I wouldn't say common. It's the market's so sophisticated now. Everyone's smarter. Data's more accessible. Got content like yourself out there, so people know what they're doing. In terms of mistakes. I think it's throwing out a baby with the bathwater. So say I think it was 2019 maybe, when it was the Tom Phillips from Hawthorn CBA's.
Yes, I remember that year. Might have been a bit later, actually.
150 in the pre-season. Then there was a Jordan Agoe midfield move, and there was a Jordan Clark big preseason. I think he got a 140 in the preseason halfback flank. So we all picked these players, and they all flopped. It was back, rewind back to 2015 when mid-price were a dirty word, and people were like, oh, well, obviously that didn't work. That value didn't work. So they went back to the old tried and true guns and rooks. So I think it's more keeping that right philosophy. They're not always going to come off. And this year I think there'd be 50 names of players who we deem to be good value. They're not all going to pay off with value, but as long as you're doing the right things and applying the right metrics over the course of the years, more often than not, they will pay off. So, yeah, in terms of a mistake would be just using one failed mid-pricer as a reason why not to go.
Yeah, there's definitely that temptation to get trigger happy and chop blokes out of your team and put blokes into your team based on only a few data points. So I think it's good. Staying true to the method is what's required over the course.
Yeah, and I think when I was coming into AFL Fantasy, I started with fantasy basketball and came into AFL Fantasy a little bit later in the game. And I think it was 2021 where I first got your season guide, and we're going to shout this out a few times on the podcast, but absolutely, if you haven't got your Moreira's Magic season guide, it's almost a must-have these days, so go and pick that up. But I was sort of still learning my way around it, and a lot of the time I think my mistake was I was trying to go too heavy into finding just value at all costs, and I think there was a Zach Williams at the time where I went down that path instead of someone like a Darcy Parish, and it was some of those 50-50 calls where you look back and it's it's gone derailed one way, and then it's completely gone. If I had just had this other player, my season could have been totally different. So, just kind of finding that balance. Yeah,
that's also the sliding doors. Like Zach Williams came off. If I remember the year correctly, I think he was averaging 108, playing midfield for GWS. Moved to Carlton, writing was on the wall. Everything that could have worked. So that's almost back to the other mentality where it's you're not going to get everything right, and if it doesn't, then it's well, that's all right. I'll go again next year and hope that it does pay off. And I said, more often than not, it should pay off. But we can't just it's too hard of a game to think that we're going to get every single call correct.
Yeah, 100%. If we were to, again, take another step back for you, if you were to predict, so obviously the value development has been sort of the game-changing strategy for the last several years. What do you predict to be sort of that next development or next growth in AFL fantasy strategy sort of league-wide? Or do you think that, to your best prediction?
Good question, and requires a bit of thought. So this year there's obviously going to be completely different with these buy rounds, and I'm sure enough's been talked about the buy rounds over the preseason that we don't need to go too deep into them, but I dare say there's going to be a different methodology around that, and whether Tasmania come in and there's a buy round in the second week, there might be a bit to play with there. But there's a reason why the value option has been working the last 7 years. It's because those top-end guys haven't backed it up and performed again. So it's been quite easy that, yes, you going the value, you take your haircut on the top end and hope that you can eventually catch them and complete your team quicker. And it's helped the fact that Rory Laird didn't back it up last year that he did the year before, Jack Steele and Tuke Miller. Whereas back in the day, before this value method was working, there was Gary Ablett Jr., Dane Swan, Dean Cox and the Ruck, who every year just kept getting their 120s, 120s, 120s. So all we'll take is for Bontempelli this year to go 125, and those who have started with him and ignored the value and said, stuff you, Selby, are going to then have this guy, Bontempelli, worth $1.3 million and no one can get back up and afford him. So I'd like to the data's there to show that over 7 years, no winning team started with anyone priced over 116. So I'm happy to say, well, if I keep doing this, yes, 1 in 7, it might not work, but more often than not, it will work. But yeah, in terms of a different strategy which could work, it could be paying up for those fully priced players and having them completely dominate and back it up, and looking at the rest of the comp knowing that they won't be able to afford them and get them in.
I think it's interesting too. I don't know whether there's something to this, but the game of AFL these days is just so difficult to play. Like the running that's required, the physicality, and then from a strategic perspective, clubs are so good at making you do what you don't want to do. So those guys just going around year to year, just backing up those 120s, teams are just probably not going to let them do that in terms of strategy as well. So I'm a bit inclined to think the way you two, Selby. If the data says that over 7 years that's the case, then I think we have to go with that.
The other interesting point that I thought of just while you were speaking there, Selby, is that we've also at this interesting point where just the league, there's this kind of wave, I think, coming up of these young stars as well. So players like a Nick Dacos, Tom Green, Errol Goulden, like they're at the very beginning of their prime and they're already like top of their line. So who's to say they're not going to maybe take another step up as a bit of a differing opinion. And this year, obviously, all three of those guys that I just mentioned have the early buy, so it dissuades us from picking them. But in a normal year, maybe it might buck the trend a little bit. Now, I like Luke, I kind of agree with you, but yeah, it is interesting to see that, maybe, the same strategy might not work year on year, but that's why we play the game, isn't it? Let's talk about the next question here. What have you got over there, Luke?
Yeah, so I've heard you mention, on numerous occasions, it's predominantly a trading game, but obviously we spent the whole preseason obsessing over our starting teams, changing them 3,000 times, and cocking it up most of the time. But when you're looking at that starting team, mate, what is it that you're looking for in a starting worthy player? What are you assessing to make your decisions based around those guys that you're starting?
Yeah, I like to try to make sure every player can at least perform in line with what they're priced at, which typically, if they played a full season or more than 10 games the year before, is what they averaged the year before. So my top-end premiums, I want to find a way where, why were they down the year before, or why are they going to improve it this year? Is it the young kid, as you mentioned, Sarong, Goulden, Tom Green, are they going to break out and just go even better? Or is it the older guy who had a down year with injury-wise, whether it's Jack Steele or Ollie Wines, where if they can bounce back anywhere near the best, can they get there? So I like playing – I don't know which one's more successful.
That was going to be my next question.
Yeah, the older ones I think are safer, knowing that they have that ability to do so. Like even a Caleb Sarong we saw last year, he went – first year in the comp 80, second in the comp 80, third year in the comp 90, and then just went bang. So if we didn't really know that there was going to be a Will Brodie, who was one of Docker's best players the year before, get kicked out of the team, I was pretty bullish on Jaeger O'Meara, who didn't really give much of a yelp. So I was trying to think, well, how's Sarong going to fit in there and get that breakout? So a lot of it comes down to chance, and we can't pick them all, as I mentioned, off the top. But you can know that if someone, like in my glory years when I picked whether it was a Dyson Heppel or Mark Murphy in the midfield who came off an injury, and we knew in the past they had gone 25 points above what they were priced at. They were still, less than 30 years old. So if everything goes well and they keep that back roll, they should get that upside. So I think the older one, bounce back, is the safer one. Yep. But there's also a bit of risk with that too, mind you, with injury-wise. If you get the young kid who goes, like we saw last year, Butters, Rosie, Sarong, Goulden, they just go the next level.
How would you assess, like, figuring out which of those older guys are going to be the ones that bounce back? Because I remember last year, and same question for us this year, Jack McRae was on everyone's lips of that guy. He was priced at 104 last year, and some mentality was saying, well, he's done 116s, whatever the past, he can go back up to that. And, obviously that didn't work out. Now, that's not to say that he can't, be that guy this year, but what in your mind are you looking for as to, like, whether or not that is something that's possible versus something that's not possible? And what's that sort of look like to you?
Well, age is one. It's tough to see someone getting back to their best if they're over 30. And then it's
rule.
then it's roll, obviously. And the most easily accessible data we've got is CBA. So you mentioned McRae. He had that dip in CBAs last year, the year before, coming into last year. And with Dunkley going, we thought, okay, well, he'll get a bit more back in the midfield and could get back to that 116 level. We didn't know there was going to be Bontempelli full-time midfielder and he was going to be the main beneficiary, Tom Liberatore. So things certainly, you can have the right philosophies and think this is going to work, but it's not always going to play out. But you've got to try to predict what role they're going to play, and if you think it's going to be the same. So we mentioned Ollie Wines off the top, coming off an injury, but when he was in his Brownlow year, there was no such thing as a Zach Butters and a Rosie doing what they're doing now. So you've got to kind of weigh that up with where you think they can go and try to mix it all together. And that's kind of the as you said, you change your team 3,000 times the preseason. This is where it's all unknown. When it becomes a trading game, we know what the role is. We know what they're scoring. We know what the break even is. We know what other people around the top own. So quite often your hands force for you, whereas this is the great unknown. I think it's why we love it. This time of year, it's all hope.
Yeah.
Another month. It's all nerves, and then another month after that's all disappointment. But we love it.
Can I ask a quick follow up? So you mentioned obviously trading game. Like, does that to you mean that team vanilla can be the way to go at the start? to make it a trading game?
I think so. You look back at the winning teams over the last, we've got the 4 in the article just put up on the season guide, and I dare say anyone would look at them and be like, well, I thought that was pretty well my team.
Why did I win the highlights?
There might be a few tweaks. Like the winner last year was he didn't have Josh Dunkley. He was a popular forward and expensive, and had a Jaden Hunt. And you say a trading game would have been very strong not to trade out of Jaden Hunt after his 60 in round 1, particularly with his low ownership percentages. So that's where it becomes that trading game. And a vanilla team typically, I think you guys have even said this before, but you can't lose the car with a vanilla team leading into round 1.
Yeah, but you can certainly lose it with a out there pick that just puts you a step behind the rest of the competition. To reflect back on your winning years, you won it back when there was a Friday night lockout before this new age fantasy of a rolling lockout, which is a bit more similar to the SuperCoach game. What would you make to your strategy in your winning years when you are considering the rolling lockout in today's game? And even off the back of some news more recently that like the subs are not going to be announced until an hour before and things like that, how much can we do to prepare with those kind of elements with this rolling lockout for 2024?
Yeah, well, for one, I wouldn't have won, for sure.
I don't know, mate. I'll back you in.
Part of why I felt like I went well is because I couldn't watch much footy over the weekend. I was playing on the Saturdays, and you'd get to the game, and I used to hate it. You have to get there at 12:30 for a 2:00 start, and then you'd play your 2.5 hours, and you go to Prezzo's, and then you'd go to the pub after. Then on the Sunday, your partner was to say, "Where were you all yesterday?"
Can't feel your legs Sunday either.
So, if there was an LDU laid out round 23 or whatever he was, round 22. I would have had no hope to compete. But in terms of strategy, it does change a bit up, particularly around these real new age ones who, like, the part of the advantage of going value is not only you can hopefully generate some more cash, but it might mean by saving some money off the top end, you might have more money for the bottom end and have safer rookies or less rookies on your field. But knowing that with the loopholes, you might be able to get 2 looks at a rookie with the having one as an emergency and doing all that sort of stuff might mean that you can have more rookies on the field knowing that you've got 2 cracks at the cherry for that rookie, which then means, well, I can then save the money rather than taking a haircut on my top end. I can put him as a gun premium. I've got 2 looks at him to be a captain and then get the high score with the captain. So it potentially adds to the guns and rooks philosophy. But as I said, I'll play SuperCoach and try to be competitive in it, and I try not to do too much of that bench looping and stuff, because I also feel like as much as we love this game, if you get too, like any hobby, if you get too overindulged in it, you can start getting a bit of burnout. And when you're doing well and you're trading well, you start seeing it well, like you start feeling it. And then so I think it's important to keep that mind refreshed as well, and there's almost an advantage to switch off over that weekend as well.
I love that take, mate, because Mitch is a sweaty.
I
Mitch
live
is
it.
the guy
I'm in it.
sweating over his laptop, and I love the idea of just being able to chill out. I think like the point you make is
easier said than done. I ride it more than anyone, but even like, and that's where you mentioned ownership. Like, there's a few on Twitter who, I'm trying to think last year, say Rowan Marshall might have had a slow start or got subbed off, and they're panicking on Twitter. So, well, you can't be panicking about that. Like, if you panic about a most popular person in the top 1,000 getting subbed off, then you're not going to be able to last the year. Yeah. You need you get nervous about your mid prices who are lowly owned. No question.
When you trade into Callum Mills and he goes for a 3, that's when you panic.
At the end of the day, like if you,
I'm going to give myself a plug here. So we're launching hopefully a new product.
Yes, I'm very excited about this.
Aimed towards round 0, the opening round. So keep an eye out for that. Hopefully it'll be around the next week, a bit over a week, we'll be able to launch it. But there'll be little rules in that, which is there'll be a hard lockout from the Saturday morning. So you'll know the teams from the Friday final teams. You'll have one look at a loophole if you want to loop, but you don't have to rush home from work or from the pub on a Friday to put your team in and still fix it on a Saturday. Come Saturday, if you get an injury early, like the real life AFL, there's subs. If your player plays less than 40% game time, you'll get the hire of either your emergency for that position or them. So you say to Callum Mills, you already got hit with the low score on field, the price drop, and the forced trade, whereas at least this softens the blow with the initial one, which then throws in the element of we'll do on more strength in our benches because you might have more of a chance with this 40 with a concussion 40% rule, and then you might not want a loophole because you then sacrifice that emergency. So a few more ways in there to hopefully have people to enjoy the game and switch off, and particularly around this round 0, which is we're hopefully going to have a decent prize for. People have a bit of fun with that.
Absolutely. The more and more I think about it, the more excited I am for round 0. I think it's going to be, I don't know, I used to be anti-round 0, but now I'm coming around to it. And these great competitions, I think will be even more so to get around it. So definitely get around that. Let's talk about those trades and things like that. When you are talking about different points in the season, like how do you approach trading in the early parts of the season versus mid parts and the end of the season? Do you sort of see the year in different kind of, I guess, sections, or talk a bit about that in terms of different levels of strategy?
Yeah, I think it is. You mentioned earlier that it is a trading game, which, as I said, it is. Like, I think my year when I won by that record margin, I was coming 19,000th after the first week. So we're all in it together, and then that's when you, particularly early, that's the fix-up trades, and you start seeing those mid-prices who you liked, but you just want to see surety on roll. When you get that and the scores, that's when you can jump on them in those early rounds. In terms of how it changes the season goes on, depending on rank, so that's when you can look at whether if you're trying to shoot towards the top 1,000, you can look at the ownership figures of the top 1,000 and try to pick someone who's not in that, or trade out someone who's underperforming who's in that. So I think those deep dive ownership numbers are important, particularly around the main ownership number on the platform. It's quite often skewed. Like, I'll put in a draft team and I get auto-filled a classic team full of Carlton and Richmond players who play the first night.
Yeah.
So the whole ownerships are never quite exact. So if you can get the top 1,000, top 100 ownership percentage, give you a better feel for what everyone's doing, and try to trade around that if you're going towards a pointy end, and obviously play safety if you want to preserve your rank, or whether it's in your league and trade in the popular players there. So it depends what your aims are, but yeah, the trading game and looking at ownerships become that's all part of the fun during the season.
Absolutely.
Beautiful, mate. You've been so generous with your time. If we can get you for one last question, we're going to ask a sort of player-specific question here. Rucks has obviously been a hot topic in this preseason.
This one I threw in
so
for
far.
my own personal benefit, because I am battling for this decision.
Mitch is being self-indulgent. So Mitch wants to know. Do you want to?
I'm sure. No, you go. This is for people.
So we want to know, Gawn, Grundy, X-Airy, how are we rating these guys? Where do you see the best value? Who are we starting in Classic?
Yeah, if you could prioritise them, rank them 1 to 3 in terms of best order.
Well, scoring wise, it's Gawn, Grundy, Cherry, but I think
that's easy. Yeah.
If there was a utility position in this game, which I mentioned that round 0 comp will have a utility position to
one of these boys that could be in there.
You'll be able to, 100% I'll be picking all 3 of them. So I don't think when we talked about you can win or lose the Hilux, unless there's an early injury to one of them in the first 5 rounds, I don't think that the decision between that combination is going to be going to hurt. I think they're all 3 are good picks for a reason. So I'm sitting on the fence a little bit. If you want to be talked into Cherry, at least you can say, well, at least he hasn't got an early buy. But the other 2 is like, well, they're going to potentially push the top 2 rucks. So you can mount a argument for both. My current SuperCoach is sitting with Gawn and Grundy, if that gives any indication.
Okay. All right.
Well, there you go, mate.
I'll take that. And you've at least talked me off the edge, and I don't have to panic too much about it since they're all good picks. But we'll have to wait and see, obviously, with the round 0. So thank you very much, Selby, for your time. If anyone listening has not checked out moreirasmagic.com, go and check it out. Get your season guide. A good portion of those funds go towards Starlight. Do you want to maybe just fill the audience in about Starlight and what's going on there? It's obviously a really good cause, and let us know what's the initiative and how it all works from that point of view?
Yeah, so we've been supporting them from the season guide from the start, which I think was 7 years ago. So in that time, we've granted 26 wishes, I think, at average $6,500 to 6 kids and family. So we're aiming again to do another 4 this year, which will be the 26K mark.
Awesome,
so
mate.
First 26K, if we hit it, that will be donated to Starlight out of the season guide proceeds.
Awesome, yeah, that's a great cause, and it really is worth your money. It's like the best guide going around, and you've even crossed over into basketball. Checked out the basketball moreirasmagic.com season guide last season, and it's a banger there as well. So well worth your time checking that one out, guys, if you haven't already. We've already talked about your opening round, but is there anything else coming up that you want to plug quickly before we sign you off?
No, that's the main one. If you just keep an ear to the ground for this comp, it should be good fun. Hoping to get a few little private groups in there as well. So you might have a Ball Boys group for this round 0 comp, hoping the prize will be good enough and a bit of fun, especially as, you know, we put so much, 3,000 change in this starting squad. Sometimes it's good to have this. It's like when you play with basketball draft, you got multiple leagues, that it kind of diversifies a little bit of emotion. So have this second little thing going on. I know it's hard enough to keep control of one team, let alone 2, or those who play SuperCoach as well, 3. But sometimes it's good to kind of diversify a little bit and see what you do. So keep an eye out for that. Hopefully you have an announcement in the next 10 days or so.
Beautiful.
Very, very exciting. Thank you very much for coming on the show, Selby. If you guys enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to give it a big thumbs up over on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button and find us on Twitter. We've got plenty of more content coming around. Practice matches are just around the corner, Luke.
We've got
footy to look out for, so stay tuned, guys, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Beautiful.